There is a frequency that only opens after midnight. Most people spin right past it, a wall of static between the stations. But if you stop, if you hold there, sometimes a voice comes through. And some of those voices have been gone for a very long time. Welcome back to the midnight frequency. Turn the lights down. Put the world on hold. For the next few hours, it's just you, the dial, and the dark. What you're about to hear are the calls that came in on the nights nobody could explain, ordinary people, on empty highways and in quiet houses, all reaching for the same phone to say the same thing. I've never told anyone this before. Some of these stories are strange. Some are sad. And a few of them still don't have an ending. So settle in. Keep the lights where they are. The lines are open, and tonight, it seems, the dead still have something to say. Let's begin. The lights flicker on and off as I sit huddled under my blanket, the warmth from my coffee barely enough to fight the chill that seeps through the walls. It's just after midnight in Fairview, a small town where everyone knows each other's business but keeps their doors locked at night. My radio is tucked close against my chest, the static crackling between songs like tiny sparks dancing on the airwaves. Suddenly, the static grows louder, swallowing up the few voices left trying to carry on their late-night conversations. As the hiss and hum envelop the dial, a voice emerges, whispering softly over the air, "I just saw him, standing at the edge of the darkness." A shiver runs down my spine, cold and unbidden. It's as if the very fabric of the night itself is speaking. The static fades in and out, and through it, I can hear another voice, more urgent this time. "Is he tall? Can you see him clearly?" The voice seems to belong to a woman, her words barely discernible over the white noise. My heart beats faster, my grip on the radio tightening. More callers join in now, their voices overlapping and building an eerie tapestry of fear. "He's wearing a trench coat," one caller says, his voice strained. "I saw him too," exclaims another, her excitement cutting through the static. "He was just standing there, staring out into the night." The radio becomes almost unbearable as more callers join in, each one adding their own twist to the growing narrative of the man at the edge of darkness. "He has a cigarette in his hand," whispers a young voice. "It's glowing, even though it shouldn't be in this cold. The air feels like it's thickening around me, pressing down on my chest." A familiar voice chimes in, steady and calm. "This is Mark, a local DJ known for his late-night show. This might sound crazy," he says, "but I saw him too." His words are tinged with something different this time, something unspoken that lingers between the lines. The static begins to quiet, but then suddenly erupts again, louder than before. This time, a man's voice breaks through, his tone urgent and desperate. He's just staring at me," he stammers. "I can't move. He's not there anymore, but I know he was." My fingers grip the radio tighter as more voices join in, each one adding to the growing madness. "I saw him too," a young voice cries. "I'm scared." And then it happens, everything falls silent. The static is back, but this time, something is different. A faint whisper filters through, barely audible over the hiss. He just smiled." The air around me seems to shudder, and I close my eyes, willing the fear away. When I open them again, the man at the edge of darkness is still there, standing in the static, staring out into the void. And then it's quiet. So very quiet. The radio crackled softly in the dead of night, the kind of static you could almost believe was a whisper from beyond. In Beatrice, Nebraska, the town nestled between miles of unlit highways and vast cornfields, the streets were empty save for the occasional passing truck. It was 1:45 a.m., and Tom was deep into his third night behind the wheel. Tom had been driving this stretch of I-29 for over a decade. The route was mundane, but tonight something felt off. As he approached mile marker 347, he glanced out at the pitch-black expanse of cornfields that stretched to the horizon. Suddenly, a faint figure stood in the middle of the field. Tom's heart lurched. It was late, too late for anything like this. "Who's there?" he shouted through his radio, trying to mask his panic with brusque professionalism. But no one answered him back. The figure didn't move, just kept its arms outstretched in a silent wave. Tom's mind raced. Was it someone stranded? A prankster playing tricks? Whatever it was too strange for comfort on an empty road at 1:53 a.m. He pulled over onto the hard shoulder and cut off his engine. The field seemed to stretch endlessly under the moonlight, a dark blanket that hid secrets. Tom couldn't shake the feeling of being watched or heard. He stepped out into the cold night air, every breath visible in the chilled evening. His flashlight beam scanned the field, but it was empty, no one to be seen. The figure had vanished. He shivered and decided to make a call to the local late-night radio show, Midnight Frequency, hoping for some kind of explanation. The line connected on its usual eerie static. "Is this Tom?" the voice, smooth and calm, asked in the dead of night. It was the host, always the same low rumble, almost hypnotic. "Yeah," Tom replied, his voice strained. "I need help with something weird." "The field, is that it?" "That's right." Tom hesitated. "What do you know about that place at that time? It's like I see a figure wave every night. Getting closer each time." The host was silent for a moment, then said, "I can't tell you much about the field itself, but I remember one caller years ago who mentioned seeing something similar. He described it as a human-sized shadow, always waving from the middle of the cornfields at 1:50 a.m. Did he ever find out what it was?" Tom asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Nope," the host replied softly. "Just that it kept coming back." A chill ran down Tom's spine as the static intensified. The host continued in that same tone, "We're not alone here, Mr. Thompson. Sometimes we just have to accept what can't be explained." Tom hung up and walked back to his truck, the door slamming shut behind him with a metallic echo. He sat for a long moment, staring at the empty cornfield through the window. And then, as if summoned by that unspoken question, he saw it again. The figure standing in the middle of the field, waving its arms in his direction. This time, the figure was closer, only 50 yards away. It was a man, dressed in old workwear, frozen in place, still waving silently. Tom sat there, rooted to the spot, until his engine hummed back to life and he backed out of the shoulder slowly. The field went dark behind him, but Tom knew it wasn't truly gone. Something was out there, in that unlit field, moving closer each night. And tonight, with a figure closer than ever before, he wondered if he would ever find peace. Amidst the quiet hum of a night shift, Sarah's eyes fluttered open, her body chilled despite the thick blankets. She lay in the guest room of her small, old house in Duluth, the walls lined with faded family portraits and the smell of stale smoke from cigarettes long past. The radio crackled softly on a nearby table, an eerie static filling the air as the midnight host began his monologue. "Good evening," the calm voice said, to everyone tuning into the midnight frequency. "Are you hearing something strange tonight? Do you have a story to share?" Sarah's phone rang then, a single sharp chime cutting through her drowsiness. She reached for it, her heart pounding. Who could be calling at this hour? "Hello?" she whispered. "Are you there, Sarah?" a shaky voice asked from the other end. It was a woman. She sounded young and scared, yet familiar somehow. "Yes," Sarah replied, sitting up, Who is this? I'm Marie. I used to live in your neighborhood, before it changed. The caller's words were hesitant, as if she was recounting her story for the first time. I know you moved here about 2 years ago, but something happened at my old house. It scared me so much that I called a friend of mine to come and stay with me for the night after it happened. Sarah's mind raced. Her own fear bubbled up as she remembered Marie's old address, just a few streets away. Can you tell me what happened? She prompted gently. Well, began the caller, I was working the night shift at that diner. You know the one, on the corner by the docks. It's always busy, but tonight was quiet. Sarah nodded along, though Marie couldn't see her. I had just left work and was driving home when I felt a chill go down my spine. It wasn't cold out, not like this time of year, you know. Then, as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd in front of the house. There was no light on upstairs. Sarah listened intently. I hesitated but eventually went inside. The place felt different somehow. Dark and empty. I checked the living room, bathroom, nothing out of the ordinary. Marie's voice grew strained as she continued, but when I went to check my old bedroom, it was there. Just standing at the foot of my bed, this figure. I couldn't make out what it was exactly, just a shape, tall and pale. It didn't move or say anything, but it was unmistakable. Sarah felt goosebumps rise as she imagined that shadowy form. Before I could scream for help, it disappeared the moment I reached for my phone to call someone. I couldn't find any marks on the wall or floor where it stood, nothing at all. But when I turned the light on, there was no one. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. I waited in that room all night, trying not to move. Nothing happened again until morning, but the light bulb above my bed flickered just before dawn. Sarah's phone beeped a second time, interrupting Marie's story. She took a deep breath and responded carefully. Was it like anything you've seen on TV or in movies? Did you try to stay in contact with anyone about this? There was a pause, heavy with fear. I tried telling my friend when she came the next day. But by then, it wasn't there anymore. I don't know how long it stayed. Maybe just that one night, maybe longer. The call went silent for a moment before Marie's voice returned, hoarse and barely audible through the static. I left not long after. I don't go back to that house, and I never can. Sarah felt the tension in her body ease slightly as Marie's story came to an end. The figure at the foot of her own bed loomed large in her mind. Thank you for sharing, Marie. If anything comes up or changes, please call us again, Sarah said softly into the phone. Static filled the line once more before it disconnected. Sarah hung up, shivering despite the warmth of her room. She turned off the radio and lay back down, trying to push away the unease that clung to her like a cold fog. As she drifted off, visions of pale shapes at the foot of beds danced in her mind, leaving an unsettling chill behind. Was it just a figment of Marie's imagination, or something far more sinister? The midnight sky was so bright and clear that the stars seemed to wink at me as I drove through the lonely stretches of Wyoming. It was almost 3 a.m., and every time my headlights swept over an empty highway, I felt as if the darkness itself were watching. My car's radio played static in between stations, a reassuring hum that masked the silence of night. As I approached the small town of Laramie, something caught my eye. A man was standing by the side of the road. The streetlights reflected his silhouette against the windscreen, and I slowed down to get a better look. His face was gaunt, with deep lines etched around eyes that seemed to hold some ancient knowledge. Is everything okay? I called out as I rolled my window down. He didn't flinch, he just nodded and leaned toward me. Can I give you a ride? It's a bit late. He hesitated, but then got into the passenger seat without much enthusiasm. As we drove, I noticed that he was wearing an old leather jacket with strange symbols carved into the inside lining, and his fingers trembled slightly. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "To Laramie," he replied in a voice that was both soft and eerily calm. "You know it." I felt a chill run down my spine but nodded. "Sure thing. It's quiet out here tonight. Is there something special about this stretch of highway?" He didn't answer immediately, instead looking out the window with an almost vacant expression. The miles seemed to pass slower than usual, and I found myself glancing at him more often. That's when I noticed it, as we passed each car, no matter how distant or passing by so quickly that they were just blurs, he would greet them by name. "Hi, there," he said softly, nodding at a black truck moving away into the distance, even though he couldn't possibly see where it was going. "Good night." I glanced at him in confusion. His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, but his mouth moved as if reciting from memory. "Did you just," I started to ask, but my voice died off when another car passed us. "Hey, that one too?" He nodded, his lips moving silently again. Each time a car zipped by, he would greet it with the same serene familiarity. It was almost like he had a script memorized. "Do you have any idea why he—" I tried to finish my sentence but stopped when another vehicle appeared in our headlights. He turned and greeted them as if they were old friends. The gesture felt uncanny, bordering on otherworldly. By the time we reached Laramie, I was barely aware of where I was driving. My mind raced with theories, hallucinations brought on by fatigue, some kind of sleep paralysis, or something far stranger. The hitchhiker got out of the car at the town's edge and turned to face me. "Thanks for the ride," he said with a strange smile that seemed to hold both comfort and a hint of sorrow. "Sure thing," I stammered, my throat tight. "Safe travels." He walked into the night without another word, his presence lingering long after he was gone. The radio still played static, but in the quiet of the car, it felt like an empty space, a void where something had just been. I drove home, the memory of our encounter lingering, and as I pulled into my driveway, I found myself reaching for the door handle again and again, as if to pull back from a dream. The night was still too quiet, too knowing, and something about it chilled me to the bone. "Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse." The phone rang at 3 in the morning, and I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the receiver, as if touching it might shock me awake back into reality. The dial tone buzzed like a ghostly hum, pulsing through the empty house. I had just been on night shift, working the graveyard, but the ringing kept insistently coming. "Hello?" My voice was small and unsure, barely more than a whisper against the wall of silence. "Hi," came the calm, deep voice from the other side. "My name is Steve, and I might have something, well, you know." I swallowed hard. "Sure, go on." "It's about last summer in Macon," he said, his voice steady as the midnight air outside my window. My house was an old place with plenty of history, but it was all just stories and shadows until last July. Steve paused, as if gathering himself to tell me what happened next. "Every evening around 6 o'clock, I would look out my living room window at the neighbor's house on my side street. Nothing unusual there, just a quiet old lady named Helen who lived in a neat little bungalow, her only company being an ever-present lamp that she left on during the night." Steve paused again, his voice softening slightly. "Then one day, I stepped outside for fresh air after coming home from my late shift. It was dusk, and I saw something strange standing directly under Helen's porch light. It wasn't a person, it couldn't have been because of its uniformity. Its body, the same shape as any human, but frozen in a single posture, never moving. My heart lurched at his words. Can you describe it? I didn't really get a good look, maybe 5 to 10 feet away, and it was hard to focus through the fog, if you know what I mean. But it wasn't just standing there. It just watched everything. Like it had been there for decades, waiting. The chill in his tone sent shivers down my spine. I started checking up on it daily. The first few nights, it was just under the light again, never doing a thing but staring at me like an apparition. I tried to stay awake, watchful, but it seemed to know when I went inside for a break or even just for a moment's rest. Steve's voice dropped lower, as if sharing something forbidden. One night, though, after my shift ended, I stepped outside again. The street was quiet, the old cars parked in their usual spots, and then there it was, still under Helen's light, but not standing alone this time. There were others. A dozen or so of them, all lined up like a row of statues, each with a single lamp lit. The silence on my end was pregnant with fear. They didn't move from their position, but I could see the ones closer to me glancing over at Helen's porch, watching her as she sat by it. It felt wrong, you know. Steve's voice caught, and I heard a faint exhale through his words. Then one evening, I saw something that I can only describe as surreal. Under the lamppost was not just a single figure, but a dozen, some motionless, others whispering. And in the middle of them all stood Helen herself, standing directly under her own light, but not moving like before. She looked alive and yet not there at once. My breath hitched. It's been months now, Steve, I said finally. And you're still watching it from time to time? Every night, he replied. It hasn't left its post. And even though Helen stays on the porch, she doesn't seem like the same person anymore. She talks about nothing but these figures, like they were friends or something. A pause, heavy with unease. And I don't know what to think. It's all so weird, he said, his voice trailing off into the distance of the phone line. I just wanted someone to share this with. The line went quiet as if the story had ended, but my mind raced on its own. What was behind those flickering lights? And who was that watcher? Steve? I whispered. Why yes. Why are you still there under that light each night? Do you think it might go away? A long pause. Then his voice returned, soft and weary. I'm not sure, he said. But every night, it just seems to wait for something. And I can't stop looking at the dark now. The line dropped into a deep static noise as if cut off entirely. I sat there, listening to nothing but the eerie silence of the night, wondering what secrets lay hidden in the darkness. Is she still out there? It's 2:30 in the morning when my phone rings. I should be asleep, but I reach over and grab it anyway, hoping for some kind of distraction from the endless cycle of paperwork waiting on my desk at the ride-sharing app's hub. The caller ID says. My hand hovers over the screen. Hello. I say into the radio mic. The voice is young, tentative. I need to talk about something. Sure, go ahead, I encourage gently. I was in a car last night, the voice trails off, as if unsure how to continue. It happened on my way back home from work. My pulse quickens just a little, and I shift in my seat, trying not to let the tension seep into my tone. What can you tell me about your ride? I was working late at the hospital, he continues. I got a passenger who, well, he didn't look right. Can you describe him for us? I ask. The guy looked young, maybe in his early 20s, the caller says. Normal enough. But, his voice falters slightly as if recalling something unsettling. The car was old, 90s Ford, I think. Just a sedan. The rearview mirror kept fogging up really quickly whenever he turned to look at me. So you could only see his head and shoulders? I prompt. Exactly, the caller confirms. I had an open window on my side, but there was this feeling of being stared down from that back seat. Like something was watching me even when it shouldn't have been able to. He hesitates, as if gathering strength to keep going. And then, he just didn't get off at the next stop. Silence stretches between us for a moment before the caller speaks again. He got out right after I picked him up from another house, somewhere in South Reno. The driver who dropped him off said it was his old place. A chill runs down my spine as the story unfolds. This isn't just some late-night ride, this could be something serious. You didn't see where he went? I ask. No, the caller admits. The guy told me to get into the car and then they vanished into that house without even locking the front door. I left a few minutes later, but when I got there, it was locked up tight. Do you know if anyone else used your vehicle after this? I ask. I didn't use it again that night, he says quickly. I had someone check on my car, and everything seemed fine. But the next morning, the passenger was back in the back seat, and the mirror still fogged up. The story is creeping into a darker place now. Can you tell me what happened when you saw him this time? I ask carefully. He was sitting there, the caller says softly. But he didn't look like he did before. His face, it seemed older somehow, more gaunt. And his eyes, they were empty. The implication is clear, something sinister had occurred in that house. Do you think anything happened to him? I ask gently. I don't know, the caller says. He pauses, and I can hear a sob starting in his voice. I just felt helpless. Like there was nothing I could do. The radio mic feels heavy as my heart beats faster. This caller is genuinely scared, and he's trusting me with something big. Can you describe anything else about that house? I ask, trying to keep the conversation going. Any windows or lights? It's not exactly a lighted place, he says. It's old, like the whole street. There are broken shutters on some of the houses, and when it was dark, everything just looked wrong. His voice cracks again as he trails off. I can hear the desperation in his voice. Did you call anyone after this happened? I ask gently. I tried to, he says, his voice shaking. I called my friends, my family. They said they would come check on me, but they never did. And then I got a text from the other driver who had picked him up. Said it was best if I just dropped him off and ignored it. The silence that follows is oppressive. Are you okay right now? I ask softly. I don't know, he says, his voice breaking into another sob. I keep hearing voices, whispering to me from the back seat of my car. His voice rises in pitch and intensity. They say if I ever go near that house again, something bad will happen. My heart clenches as I realize this isn't just a late-night story, it's real for him. Is there any way we can help you? I ask. There are no answers, he says, his voice flat and resigned. And even if there were, I'm scared to go back and check again. There is no logical explanation for what happened tonight. No rational answer that would make this story feel any less chilling. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, I say softly. We're here for you, but we can't take care of it on the radio. The static hissed and crackled over the airwaves like a restless ghost, refusing to settle into any particular song or station. Jack's thumb tapped absent-mindedly against the steering wheel as he drove home from the night shift at the steel mill. The small town of Amarillo stretched out behind him, its lights dim and flickering in the early hours. It had been a typical night, loud machinery, heavy metal stomping, the clanging of scrap metal being dragged across the floor. He could still taste the sweat and dust from the previous few hours on his tongue. Now, as he passed through a long tunnel in the highway's design, the silence was almost too much. Just when Jack thought he might nod off into the darkness, the static began to shift. It wasn't a sudden spike or a brief interruption. Instead, it seemed to change shape and grow louder, like a figure leaning closer to him from across the void of space and airwaves. Jack pressed his hand against the car radio, willing the sound to recede. But the noise persisted, now punctuated with odd, intermittent whispers that sounded almost human, like someone trying not to be overheard. His heart hammered in his chest as he swerved slightly off course, needing to get a better look at this manifestation of static. He pulled into an empty parking lot and turned up the volume on his old Sony AM radio. The air grew colder than it should have been for a Texas summer night. Jack leaned forward, trying to discern any concrete details through the distortion. And there, in the midst of the chaos, a shape began to take form, a looming silhouette that seemed to move closer as he listened. The figure was indistinct, its edges blurred, but with an unmistakable malevolent presence. It whispered something, words that were almost drowned out by the hiss but carried an eerie, otherworldly quality. Jack's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he thought the radio had failed him. But then, the image of the figure, vague yet menacing, faded away as quickly as it had appeared. The static returned to its usual pattern, but this time, Jack knew what he had heard. As if on cue, his phone began to ring, a strange call that might just be too real. In a small, snow-dusted town like Belfry, North Dakota, nothing ever seemed out of place. Or so I thought until the day my neighbor, Lila, vanished without a trace. It was just after 3 a.m., and I was staring out at her house with a cup of stale coffee in hand. There she was, or at least it felt like there was. Her curtains flapped gently against the breeze, creating an eerie silhouette that made me shiver. Then I realized something was wrong. Lila's car was still parked outside, but the lights were off, always left on when she went to bed. And her window blinds? They were pulled down, yet moving slightly with the wind. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I'd been calling this number all night, hoping for an answer, anyone who would listen. You see, every evening at exactly 2 a.m., my friend Lila calls me from her phone. It's like she's checking in to make sure everything's okay, even though we live less than a mile apart. Tonight was no different. I picked up the receiver after it rang twice, and that's when I heard her voice through the crackling static of the night air. "Hello," said Lila, but it wasn't really Lila. The voice was off, too soft and muffled as if coming from a great distance. "Lila? Is that you?" my voice echoed in the dark room of my apartment. Static drowned out any response she might have made. I could feel myself getting cold, a chill creeping up my spine like ice water. I dialed her phone again, hoping for her to answer, but no one picked up. I tried her landline, her cell, nothing. All I got was the same static, the same faint whisper of a voice that sounded nothing like Lila's usual clear tone. Then it hit me, there were footsteps on my porch. A cold draft swept through my little space, and for just an instant, someone stepped inside, or so it felt to me. It was like a wraith had come through the thin walls of my apartment, leaving behind a lingering chill that seemed to mock my fear. Now I'm trapped in this silent house, listening to the static fill the air. Lila's phone continues to ring, but she's not answering. And in between those blips and beeps, there's something else, a faint whisper of laughter that sends shivers down my spine. It sounds like a child giggling, but I can't tell if it's real or just an echo of my own paranoia. I'm alone here now, with nothing but the eerie presence of Lila and this strange night. And as dawn starts to creep into the sky outside, I find myself whispering back to her, hoping against hope that she might hear me. Lila? Are you still there? You're listening to the Midnight Frequency. Keep the lights where they are. The night was old and heavy as I drove down County Road 57, the tires of my truck hissing over the gravel. It had been a long shift at the local diner, but now the silence was almost palpable, except for the single digit on my phone that never seemed to ring until I least expected it. I was heading home to Wheeling, just a quarter-mile from where my mother's old house lay, its lights dim and empty like a hollowed-out pumpkin. The county road twisted gently, each bend echoing with the secrets of countless nights. But tonight, something felt wrong, too quiet. The static hummed under my skin. It was a small thing, at first, a flicker in the rearview mirror that I couldn't shake off. A shadow, but not just any shadow, it moved when no breeze stirred. My breath caught, and I pulled over to check, but there was nothing. Just darkness, thick and unyielding. My phone buzzed, startling me from my thoughts. I reached for it in the cup holder, feeling the cold metal against my fingers. It was a message from my own number. Is he still there? The question sent shivers down my spine. I knew who he was. Everyone around these parts whispered his name, the tall man. He had been spotted by locals for years at this bend in the road, always standing where the horizon dipped behind the old house. They said he wore a black coat that stretched to the ground and moved like a shadow himself, never looking left or right but always toward my mother's place. I had heard their stories, of course. My father told them to me as I lay wide awake in his bed, too young then to understand the terror behind the tales. But now, as I sat alone in the truck with only the hum of the engine for company, those whispers became real. The phone buzzed again, a repeated message echoing like a hollow drum. Is he still there? I started up the truck and turned onto County Road 57, the bend ahead looming like a dark mouth waiting to swallow me whole. As I approached it, something moved in my peripheral vision, a fleeting glimpse of black that caught the streetlight just enough to cast an eerie shape against the trees. The car began to slow on its own, as if pulled by some invisible hand. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat echoing with the sound of my boots clomping on the gravel. The bend came into view, and there he was, a figure silhouetted against the dim light, his back turned towards me. I braked abruptly, the truck's wheels spinning on the slick surface of the road. My voice caught in my throat as I rolled down the window, feeling the cold night air rush past. Is he still there? I whispered, my words barely audible over the whine of the engine. He turned then, his face twisted in a way that was both human and not, more like a puppet's shadow. The light played off his features, casting long, jagged shadows on the ground behind him. His eyes, if you could call them that, were empty sockets, black pits that seemed to peer into my very soul. The phone buzzed again, but this time it was just a faint vibration in my pocket. It wasn't the same, something had changed. The tall man's figure began to move towards me, his steps echoing like heavy boots on hard-packed earth. I hit the gas, the truck surging forward with a sudden roar. My tires screeched as I swerved into an abandoned lot across the road, my heart pounding like a trapped wild animal. Behind me, the bend was empty, only the static of my radio played over the airwaves. But when I turned back to check on the house, the lights were out, and everything was still. The phone buzzed once more, but there was no answer. No message, just the cold, lonely night. And in that moment, a chill crept up my spine, settling like frost into the corners of my mind. Is he still watching? It was just past midnight on a Saturday when Lila Dutton picked up her old rotary phone. She'd been dreading this moment since she took the night shift at the diner, but it had come anyway. The line buzzed with static, and something about that noise sent a shiver down her spine. "Hello?" she said into the receiver, her voice barely above a whisper. She was alone in her small three-bedroom house on the outskirts of Bangor, Maine. The autumn air outside was crisp and cold, and the shadows in her living room grew longer with each passing moment. Suddenly, there was a knock. 3 distinct raps echoed through the house. Lila's heart raced as she looked down at the phone receiver, her fingers trembling on the rotary dial. She hesitated, then pressed 0 twice, as if calling for backup. Another set of knocks answered back, this time louder, and coming from somewhere deep in the bowels of the house. "Who?" she managed to choke out, but before she could finish the sentence, a low rumble filled her ear, muffled yet unmistakable. It sounded like the knocking was emanating from below, perhaps even underfoot, as though something, or someone, was deliberately mimicking her own knocks. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 12:34 a.m., and the shadows began to dance eerily across the floor. The knocking continued, now punctuating with soft groans that seemed to come from an old wooden floor creaking underfoot. With trembling fingers, Lila hung up and sat stiffly in her chair, heart pounding. She tried calling out for help, but her voice caught in her throat. The knocks resumed, this time louder and more insistent, as though the visitor was growing impatient. "Who are you?" she shouted into the silence, feeling a cold sweat break over her forehead. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to weigh down on her like a fog. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but a faint creak from the basement made her jump. Lila's mind raced as she considered all possibilities. Perhaps it was just an animal, or maybe something more sinister. As if in response, the knocks began again, this time faster and more rhythmic. They were still in threes, 3 raps, 3 groans, repeating without pause. She couldn't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever, was making these sounds wasn't just curious but actively engaged with her. The knocking grew louder until it seemed to surround her, pressing in from all sides. Lila's blood ran cold as she realized there might be something in her home that had no right to be there. And then, the knock stopped again, replaced by a silence so heavy, it felt like she was suspended in time itself. Lila's breaths came in short gasps as the seconds stretched into what seemed like an eternity. The house remained eerily silent, save for her ragged breathing and the faint creak of the floorboards. The visitor had left without a word, but Lila knew she would never forget this night, not with those knocks echoing in her mind, or the empty cellar that now whispered secrets of its own. It was a quiet Friday night when I found myself staring at an old family photo album. The house had been silent since my parents moved into retirement living. Their room smelled faintly of lavender, a scent they favored. That evening, though, a chill ran through the air as if a long-dead ghost wandered the halls. I was sorting through childhood memories, the kind that paint corners of your mind with a past you can barely remember anymore. And then I found it, tucked in between pictures of me and my father building a treehouse. A single photograph caught my eye, a candid snap from our backyard. It showed 3 of us, Mom, Dad, and me standing on the porch, all grinning and looking right into the camera. I traced their faces with a finger, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I turned to copy the photo for myself. The album was ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle, yet, every time I flipped through, it felt as if I were peeking inside a locked door of something hidden away. My mother's face looked young, almost smiling. My father stood tall beside her, his back straight. But me, I was wide-eyed, my cheeks flushed with laughter. The next day, the same photo ended up on my desk at work, an old snapshot I had copied and left behind. My co-workers glanced over curiously before shrugging it off as a childhood memory. They didn't know about the eerie feeling that lingered around me after I brought the photo into our office. At night, when I returned home, I noticed something odd. My copy of the photo looked slightly different. The back seemed to have been altered, though there was no trace of anyone else having handled it. There were no fingerprints, no sign of tampering. But every time I held the original photo from the album against mine, one thing stood out: my face. In every print I made, my head grew progressively closer to the camera. Each copy showed me slightly more intense, almost as if the very act of copying had altered reality itself. The first few prints were just a fraction off, but by the third copy, something changed. My nose barely fit in frame, pushed forward against my cheek. The difference was so small it could only be noticed when comparing side by side. Still, there stood this unexplainable face, closer to the lens with every new print. By then, I had stopped making copies. Every glance at that photo felt heavier than the last. It began to seem as if someone, or something, was watching, waiting for me to notice. I couldn't shake the feeling that each time my hands moved over paper and ink, a piece of myself was being drawn into this strange, uncanny transformation. Now, every night when I return home, the same old photo album beckons from its hiding spot behind the dresser. The faces still hold their smiles, but there's something else, an almost unnoticeable shift in the third copy. It's as if that face is watching me, trying to push itself closer to the light. I wonder what it means, what secrets lie hidden within those prints and that album. Is it just my imagination playing tricks on me, or are these ghosts from our past seeking some form of connection? In the stillness of the early morning hours, a voice droned into the quiet room. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked softly, the lines of my hand crinkling as it gripped the old rotary phone tighter. This late-night studio was eerie enough, but tonight, something felt different. The station in Yuma, Arizona had been bustling with calls all night, stories of hauntings and strange occurrences. Usually by this time, the host would have his usual routine, checking the script, sipping a cup of cold coffee, and waiting for the next caller. But today, there was no sign of him. The room smelled faintly of stale smoke and old carpet, as if the place hadn't seen much fresh air in years. The radio static hissed softly in my ear, an unbroken stream that only underscored the silence outside. I shifted uncomfortably in the chair, adjusting my coat collar against the chill. The night was biting cold. A flicker of light from under the door caught my eye, and I rubbed my eyes as if they were deceiving me. Then, with a start, it disappeared, leaving only the dim glow of the screen on my phone. "Hello?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I could feel the eyes of the night watching me through the dusty window. The walls seemed to close in around me as I sat there alone, the room empty except for a few framed pictures that hung crookedly and an old-fashioned microphone perched atop the desk. Each picture showed different faces, some familiar, others not. They all stared back at me with a quiet intensity that was unnerving. I glanced at the clock on my phone, 3:14 a.m. A normal time for the show to start, but today it had been silent and still. The air was thick with an unsettling tension that made my skin prickle. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and the rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock from down the hall added to the disquieting atmosphere. And then, without warning, the host's voice cut through the static, slow and calm yet tinged with an edge that made me shiver. "Good evening," he said. The words were familiar, but something about them sounded off, a subtle undertone of something I couldn't quite place. It was as if he knew exactly how alone I felt. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. There was no reply from the host, only the sound of a page turning softly in the background. "I'll let you know when to start," his voice continued smoothly, and for a moment, it seemed like a relief. But then, another thought crept into my mind, a chill running down my spine. Or do I just sit here waiting? I wondered aloud, my breath misting in the air. The room grew colder, and the static on the radio seemed to intensify, as if trying to blot out whatever was happening outside. I turned to look at the host's desk, where a small stack of papers lay untouched, still arranged neatly like they were only moments ago. But now something seemed wrong. The air felt heavy with an unspoken threat that made my scalp prickle. "What's your story?" the host asked, his voice carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "Tell me what happened tonight." The words hung in the silent room, an ominous promise of what might follow. My heart thumped loudly in my chest as I struggled to steady myself. The host's gaze seemed to follow me, though he was clearly not looking at anything. "Did you see something out there?" his voice pressed gently but insistently. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. There's nothing out there," I managed to reply, my hands fidgeting with the phone's receiver as if it could somehow protect me from whatever was coming next. But just as those words left my lips, a faint whisper seemed to carry through the room, a word that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, unseen. The host didn't answer. The radio crackled, and for a moment, I thought he had hung up. But then his voice spoke again, barely audible over the static. Is anyone there?" And before I could reply, the line went dead. This next call came in just after 3, the hour they say the veil is thinnest. The call came in just before 3 a.m., the time when most of Oxford, Mississippi had long since gone to sleep. The static buzzed softly over the airwaves as I settled back into my swivel chair, ready for tonight's late-night broadcast. "Hello? Hello?" squeaked the familiar crackle from the microphone. "No one here. Are you there?" The silence stretched out, the kind that hung heavy and filled with possibility. Then finally, "Yes, sir. I'm here." A pause. The breath caught in my throat as a man's voice, soft yet urgent, broke through the static. "Can I ask your name?" I asked, trying to keep the note of curiosity out of my voice. "My name is Jack," he said quietly. "Jack Reeves. I live on Old Mill Road." A shiver ran down my spine. Something about his tone made me uneasy. "Jack," I repeated, "what can you tell us tonight?" He hesitated, and it felt as if the world itself held its breath for a moment. "I've been seeing something, under the porch light out back," Jack said slowly. "At exactly the same time every night." I leaned forward in my chair, the cold of the metal making me tense up. "You say you see something?" I prompted. "Something," he corrected. "Every night at precisely 2:57 a.m., just when that bulb flickers on, there's a figure under the porch light. Just standing there." I felt myself nod along to his words, even though no one else could see me. "Can you describe it?" "I've only glimpsed it from far away," Jack replied softly. "A man, in dark clothes, always facing toward my house. He never moves or speaks, just stands there." "Do you have a clear view of him?" I asked. "No, not really. It's shadowy and hazy when the bulb first turns on. But once it's bright enough, he just appears." "What about neighbors?" I wondered aloud. "Has anyone else seen this?" "I don't know," Jack confessed. "I haven't told anyone yet. That's why I called you tonight, sir." The dread was settling in now, like a thick fog that couldn't be shaken off. "And what makes it so strange is," he continued, his voice catching on the words, "the figure is there for exactly 3 minutes, then disappears again just as quickly." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, trying to think of what else might come next. "Do you hear anything?" I asked. "No," Jack said quickly. "Nothing. It's always completely silent when he's there." just his presence. A moment passed, heavy with unspoken questions and lingering unease. And then, the last time it happened, something didn't seem right. The figure was still under the porch light, but I wasn't sure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. For a brief second, I thought. His voice broke off, leaving an awful pause. Thought what? I prodded softly. Jack's breath wheezed out in a long, shuddering sigh. I don't know, he whispered. But when the bulb went off, there was this hollow thumping sound coming from under my porch. Like someone, no, something, was moving. I felt cold sweat bead on my forehead as I realized what Jack had just described. Did you call the police? I asked urgently. No, he said quietly. I've been waiting to share it with someone who might understand. You people do weird things, don't you? The call went silent again, a suffocating weight settling in my chest as I waited for him to continue or perhaps hang up. Tonight, the man was there for longer than usual, Jack said finally. Almost 4 minutes instead of 3. And when the light went off, no more thumping. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. I'm still here, he added in barely more than a whisper. I don't know what to do. It's been happening for weeks now. Jack, I said firmly, my voice tinged with empathy, have you tried going outside? No, he replied hoarsely. The porch is so close to the kitchen window. I'm afraid of what might be out there. What did you hear when you spoke? I asked softly. I heard nothing, Jack said, his voice trembling now. But someone, was definitely watching me tonight. Another awkward pause. The radio static hummed in the background, a reminder that this was just an ordinary late-night call-in show. Jack's voice came again, almost a plea. What if it's trying to tell me something? Or trying to warn me? I couldn't help but feel that same chill run down my spine as I thought of his story. Jack, I said softly, what do you think the worst part is going to be? He didn't answer right away. The sound of distant traffic filled the silence. Finally, he whispered, tonight. The phone rang at 3 in the morning. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the whisper of a breeze through old willows. I picked up slowly, knowing I was no longer awake. Sleep had given way to the endless quiet of my night shift. Hello. My voice was a shadow, barely audible over the static. The caller's words were as clear and calm as if they were speaking from just an arm's length away. My name is Thomas. This might sound crazy. A chill ran down my spine. Why would anyone call this late, especially to talk about something that sounded so strange? Tell me what you saw, I replied, my voice steady. Thomas's tone shifted ever so slightly, like he was adjusting the weight of his burden on a single shoulder. Well, it's not just one time. It's happening again. I tensed, waiting for him to elaborate. Instead, there was silence, just enough time for the static to crackle in a way that made my skin crawl. It started about 3 years ago, Thomas began again. I'd be driving on those long, empty highways at night, and I would see this man standing beside his car. He looked just like me. My breath hitched. How could he look exactly like him? A stranger who saw something so eerily similar. Thomas went on, he was always the same, mid-30s, tousled brown hair, glasses, a dark suit. But that's where it gets weird. It wasn't just one night. I kept seeing him. I couldn't help but ask, where did you see this man? The same spots, always at night, when there was no one around except us. Once in downtown Springfield, once near the edge of Blackwood City. He paused, and then added, but it's never just the one place. I saw him in small towns across the country. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this uncanny coincidence. How could a face appear like his in so many different places? I've been keeping track, Thomas said slowly. The same time every night, he's always there, standing beside his car, just staring off into nothingness. Did you ever try talking to him? I asked, my voice growing more urgent. No. He never turned around. By the time I realized something was wrong, it would be too late, and, gone, Thomas said, using a word that made me shiver, like he was saying someone had vanished without a trace. There was another pause, the static breathing along with us in this surreal conversation. And now again. Did you find him again tonight? Thomas's next words cut through the air like a chill wind. I just got back from my last shift. I was parked by the river in Northport, and there he was. My stomach twisted as if something unnameable was about to be revealed. What did he look like this time? The same. Same face, same everything, Thomas replied quietly. But, why are you calling now? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. I just couldn't keep it in anymore, he said, the static momentarily drowning out his voice. It's everywhere, like he's always watching. Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me with the faint sound of static and an unanswered question that hung thick between us. In the quiet of the early morning, while everyone else slept in the stillness that clung to my old house like an unwelcome blanket, my phone rang. It was the time I always checked before turning off my answering machine, but as if sensing something was amiss, I paused, then picked up the receiver. My family had already settled into their night's rest. There were no children squirming in their beds or dogs barking through old furniture that creaked with every movement. Midnight frequency, the familiar voice said, its calm tone a stark contrast to the unease building inside me. I adjusted my sweatpants and sat heavily on the edge of the wooden armchair by the window. The radio crackled faintly, sending static waves through the room. You there, Jim? Jim was my father's name. I chuckled softly, half expecting him, though it had been years since we'd spoken. Still here, I said. The host cleared his throat. I hope you're not too startled by an early call at this hour. No one expected a late-night paranormal show to rattle the nerves of ordinary folks like us. But sometimes, things happened in the quiet of night that no one else believed. I listened as he continued. Have you ever had something unwelcome visit your home? The voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension that made my skin prickle. My gaze drifted to a patch of floor under the kitchen light, a hallway leading to a dimly lit room where my mother kept her old books. It was the passage my dog seemed to dislike with an uncharacteristic fervor. It's funny how something in this house can really get under your skin. The host hummed quietly, encouraging me to continue. The dog, I said, he'd bark every night from that spot where you have to walk through those old floorboards. I remembered the creaks, familiar and annoying when they weren't there. And then he'd turn his head away and stare up with an intensity that chilled me despite the warmth of the room. Tell us more, the host prompted gently. His words cut into my thoughts like a sharp knife. My mind flickered back to those nights, each one starting in much the same way, dog barking, floor creaking, the hallway's ghostly presence waiting for me. It was just over 2 months ago. I couldn't get that dog out of there. Silence filled the line save for a distant sigh of static. Can you describe what he did? The host's voice seemed to hang in suspense, waiting for my response. He'd look up and hold that stare until it felt like hours. Sometimes, just before daylight, I'd hear this tiny scratching sound as if something was moving behind the closed door at the end of the hall. A shiver worked its way down my spine, but I pressed on. But no matter how long I waited, or what time of night, he never faced that hallway. The host's response was immediate. That's a striking detail. Do you remember anything unusual about that part of the house? Unusual? It feels like it should be explained somehow, I admitted. I mean, it's just a room with no heating and a ceiling so low my head almost bangs against it if I'm not careful. But this doesn't feel right, he pressed softly. It was true, there was something off about that hallway, as though it held secrets the rest of the house didn't. I don't know, but sometimes, when we'd go out at night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something lingered in those walls. The host didn't say anything for a long moment. But here's what got me, I whispered. On my last walk by that room, as I passed through the hallway to get home, I thought I saw a figure standing there. It was just a quick flash of light and shadow, but enough to make me turn back and hurry upstairs before I could see anything more. The air on the other end seemed colder now. Can you describe that figure? The host's voice held a note of urgency. It was like a silhouette, I stammered. A hunched figure with what looked like dark, flowing hair. I closed my eyes for a moment to replay the image in my mind. I know it doesn't make sense, but the look on that face, it was as if they knew about me. They looked directly at me. The static deepened, growing louder as though the radio itself were trying to drown out the truth. And then you didn't see anything else? The host's voice sounded strained now. No, I admitted quietly. But something wasn't right in that hallway after. It was like the dog's barking had a purpose now. The host hesitated, as if collecting his thoughts before continuing. Thank you for sharing this with us tonight. His tone was soft but firm. We'll be talking about it tomorrow night's show and looking into what might explain such an encounter. But for now, he said gently, I hope you're okay. My heart pounded in my chest, the silence stretching out between us. Yeah, I'll try. The call came through at exactly 3 o'clock. I remember hanging up my jacket by the door, looking over to see my reflection in the window, a face that appeared lost amidst the swirling snow. I shook myself awake, reaching for the phone, a chill creeping down my spine. Hello. I said into the receiver, my voice heavy with sleep. You sound like you just woke, replied the host's gravelly tone, unassailable and calm as the quiet of 3 a.m. Is that okay? Would it be easier if we wait? I sighed, the phone's static barely masking my groggy response. No. It's fine. Thank you for calling into the midnight frequency, he said, his voice like warm leather over old wood. Let's give this a try then. In the background, I could hear the distant hum of radio static, a reminder that I was alone but for this strange connection. I'm Mark, and welcome to Marquette. How have you been feeling lately? Asked the host. I hesitated, shifting in my seat. Marquette was a small town nestled deep within the Upper Peninsula. The nights here stretched out like empty highways under the gray veil of winter. Fine, I replied, trying to sound casual even as I felt an unshakable unease. Tell me about your job, continued the host with his soothing voice, almost as if he could see right through me. I exhaled slowly. I'm just a plow driver, I said. The words came out haltingly, like they were trying to escape my mouth themselves. Working on the outskirts of town. And what's been your experience like? He pressed gently. The silence seemed to stretch out longer than it should have as I thought back over the nights that had become an endless cycle, driving alone down the same icy roads, cutting a path through the frozen wasteland before dawn broke. Routine, I said finally. Just pushing the snow away. But sometimes, he prompted. Sometimes there was something different about those late-night drives. Something that niggled at me, whispering secrets in the dark. It's just the cold, I argued. The darkness makes everything seem bigger somehow. Can you tell me a bit more specifically about what happens on one of these nights? Asked Mark. I took a deep breath, trying to recall that night when it all started. Same as usual at first, I began. You know, pushing snow into drifts along the roadside. But then, there's always this feeling, you know. Like something isn't quite right. Go on, encouraged Mark. I could feel his encouraging silence, almost like he was nodding even though we were miles apart. So one night, it happened again. I swallowed hard. Same old road. Same time of night. But as I rounded the bend, I saw a figure standing there, standing in the middle of the street. I paused, remembering the cold, sharp air biting at my cheeks. The snow swirling around me, blanketing everything like frost on a pane of glass. I pulled over, got out, I continued, my voice steady despite the memory's grip on me. It was just a man standing there. Tall, bundled up in layers, hat pulled down low over his face. A shiver ran through me at that memory. He just stood there. The host waited for my next words, his tone unchanging. He didn't move, I said slowly. Didn't so much as glance my way. Just stood right where the snow had been piling up. And then, this weird thing happened. What is that? Asked Mark with genuine interest, and a little too much curiosity for comfort. I don't know how to describe it, I admitted. It was like, his reflection on the truck's window changed as soon as he turned away. My heart raced at the memory. Suddenly, there was this guy in my seat, same face, but not mine. Describe him, prompted Mark softly. He looked old, I said. Like a man who had seen too much life. His eyes were hollow, sunken in their sockets. It was as if his soul had drained away with the snow. I paused again, trying to shake the image from my mind. And then he got back into the truck and walked slowly towards me, I added shakily. Just kept walking until he reached me. Then The host cut in gently. Did he do anything else? He didn't say a word, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Just stood there looking at me for what felt like forever. And then he just disappeared. And you never saw him again? Questioned Mark. I shook my head, even though the host couldn't see it. No, I admitted quietly. Not that night, and not on any other night since. He was always standing there where he shouldn't have been, just a silent figure in the midst of an otherwise empty street. And you never told anyone else about this? Asked Mark. I hesitated, feeling like I had left some part of myself out there in the dark, waiting for me to return. No, I whispered. It felt too strange. Like something I couldn't explain. So I just drove on and left it behind. But you can't forget, said the host, his voice low and resonant. I shook my head again, feeling as if he could see right through me, into that dark corner of my mind where memories lay buried with secrets. No, I repeated. And then the line went quiet. The only sound was the static from the radio playing in the background, a haunting echo of our connection now cut short. Thank you for sharing this story with us tonight, said Mark after a long moment. You can always call back if there's anything else on your mind. I hung up, my hand lingering over the phone as I tried to push away the memories that clung to me like mist. As I closed the door behind me and stepped out into the night, the cold of the snow seemed heavier than ever. Good night, I whispered, and then stumbled backward into a pile of freshly plowed snow, disappearing beneath its embrace. If you're still with us, good. A lot of people stopped listening alone after this one. In the pre-dawn light, Sarah sat hunched over the steering wheel, her hand poised to hang up. This was nothing. Just her imagination, playing tricks on her late-night drive home from Carson City. Yet something about the silence stretched into an oppressive void, and the cold air cut through her jacket. It had been a long night at the hospital, but as she turned onto Highway 50 in Ely, Nevada, a small wrongness crept over her. The highway was empty except for the occasional truck barreling past at high speed, its lights flickering like fireflies against the black. Sarah's phone rang again, its shrill tone breaking the silence and causing a shiver to crawl down her spine. She picked up, already half gripping the steering wheel tighter. Midnight frequency, came the calm voice of the host, his words steady in the dark. "I thought it was just the static," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, but her eyes darted to the rearview mirror. For a moment, she saw nothing but road ahead, then, a shadow at mile marker 9. A silhouette against the night. "Describe that," the host prompted softly. "Just a shape," Sarah replied, her fingers tightening on the wheel. The phone crackled as he shifted his weight in anticipation. "It's like a person, maybe." Her voice was strained now. "I could swear it moved." The host paused for what felt like an eternity before speaking again. "Can you tell anything about them?" "Nothing," Sarah whispered into the static. "Just a shape." Like, she hesitated, not wanting to say more. "Like they were wearing a long coat." "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice almost as unsettling as the silence between them. "I'm glad you called." Sarah hung up and dropped the phone onto her lap. The call had left an eerie emptiness in its wake, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into place. Her breath came out in small puffs of white, each one a reminder of how alone she was on this road. She glanced at mile marker 9 again as it neared, and there it was, a shape, motionless but clearly there. Sarah pulled over onto the side of the road. The radio station had stopped broadcasting, leaving her only with the quiet hum of the engine. She turned off the lights, letting her eyes adjust to the dark. The road stretched out ahead like an abyss, the night as dense and heavy as a blanket. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled on the coat she had packed in her purse, just in case. The warmth was little comfort. She stepped onto the highway, walking slowly towards mile marker 9. Each step seemed to echo into the dark, making the trees and distant buildings seem more ominous than they were. Her heart raced, the cold biting at her skin through the fabric of her coat. When she arrived at the sign, Sarah could barely make out the number in the weak light. But the shape had vanished. Panic surged through her body as she turned to run back to her car. Just then, a faint whisper caught her ear, so soft it was almost imperceptible. "It's not over," a voice seemed to say from behind. Sarah spun around, hand flying up to cover her mouth. The night was silent again, but the memory of that whisper lingered like a chill. She stumbled back to her car and climbed inside, slamming the door shut with more force than she intended. As she started the engine, the headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only empty road ahead. The radio station started broadcasting again just as Sarah drove off, but this time, the host's voice was different, more urgent. "Did you see it?" he asked. Sarah pressed her hands against the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. She couldn't answer. Not until she knew what had happened at mile marker 9. The night was thick with fog, shrouding the hills of Montana like a blanket. I'd parked on the empty highway and turned off the headlights, my eyes tracing the dim outline of the ranch house. My father had left his favorite recliner facing the window that looked out onto the vast valley. I couldn't help but think he was waiting for me. The phone rang, startling me so much it made a scratchy sound over the airwaves. The static hissed softly in my ear as I listened to the host's quiet voice. "And just before you hang up, Mr. Jenkins, could you tell us what happened?" I hesitated, remembering those nights at the ranch, when the shadows whispered and the wind sang stories of old. But he was right. What did I have to lose? I saw him, I began, my throat tight. It was my father. And what did he say? What did he do? The host's voice cut through the fog like a spotlight. He told me something, I said. He wasn't talking. He just mouthed something at me, and then he turned and walked away. What did he say? I paused for a moment, trying to recall the exact words. It was as if they were being pulled from my mind by some unseen force. He said, the word hung in the air like a shadow, almost a whisper. He said, get out. The static buzzed louder on the radio, interrupting my thoughts. My fingers tightened around the receiver, fear twisting into something sharp and cold inside me. And what did you do after that? The host's voice was calm, but I could sense the tension in his tone. I didn't leave, I admitted quietly. I thought it was just my imagination. Thought maybe I had seen a rabbit moving in the darkness. Did you see anyone else? No, I replied bitterly. No one else. Just that same figure walking away into the fog, as if he knew someone was watching him. And did you return to your house after that? Did anything happen when you went back inside? The host's voice held a soft urgency. I didn't go in at first, I said, my voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. But then I heard something. A faint noise, like boots scuffing against the floorboards. My stomach clenched as I remembered it vividly, a low, barely audible thump. I went inside and I saw nothing. And how did you feel after that? I hesitated, searching for the right word. Disoriented. Like the world was tilted just slightly away from me. And then, the next day, things changed. My equipment failed. The phone rang but no one answered when I called out. And my father's recliner, it was facing the window again, but this time he looked at me and mouthed. My voice cracked, cutting off as a chill swept through me. I could almost feel the fog rolling into the house, carrying with it the memory of that figure in the valley. And what did he say? The host's voice pressed on, relentless. He didn't speak this time, I said softly. He just mouthed 3 words, and then. And what happened next? The phone went dead. I sat there for a moment longer, listening to the emptiness of the airwaves, before slowly hanging up. The house was quiet now, except for my own rapid breathing echoing through the darkness. In the stillness, the figure from the valley stood between me and whatever lay ahead. His words hung in the air like a warning, his form fading into the night as he turned and walked away. In the quiet of a snowy evening in Provo, Utah, Sarah leaned forward on her kitchen counter, sipping tepid tea from a mug that smelled faintly of vanilla and damp wood. The radio crackled softly beside her, static mingling with distant, muffled voices. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. She had been working night shifts at the local high school for over 2 years now, but somehow, this job never felt normal. Sarah's eyes darted to the large bay window that dominated one wall of the room. The glass reflected her pale face and the dim light from a nearby lamp. Outside, the snow had fallen steadily, coating the ground in a blanket of white. Suddenly, she heard it, an unmistakable sound of a windowpane being lightly tapped. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat as she reached for the phone. "Hello? Who's there?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. But the line was silent, and the cold night air seemed to echo with her breath. A shiver ran down her spine, and the radio static grew louder. She knew she should hang up, that it might all be her imagination or perhaps just a stray bird. But instead of lifting the receiver from its cradle, Sarah's fingers curled around it tightly as if grasping onto something tangible. Her eyes narrowed in concentration, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She repeated the question, "Hello? Who's there?" For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden intensity that sent chills down her spine, a low, almost whisper-like voice came through the receiver. "Someone is watching you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and she gasped. She looked back to the window, but the glass was clean. There was no one there. "Is that you? Are you my friend?" she asked into the phone, hoping against hope for an answer. The line went dead again, leaving only the static of the radio. Sarah stared at the window, feeling a creeping sense of dread. Every night from precisely 3 o'clock onwards, someone was watching her, someone who knew exactly when to appear and disappear without a trace. She couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on her, always, even in the dead of night. As she hung up the phone, Sarah's hand shook slightly. She thought about closing the blinds or turning off the lights, but she didn't. Instead, she waited for 3 o'clock to strike again, her fingers playing nervously with the edge of the kitchen counter. Every night from that moment on, Sarah knew someone was watching her at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. And she wouldn't be surprised if she kept hearing those whispers and tapping windows, no matter how many times she tried to convince herself it was just a trick of the mind or the cold draft from outside. The phone crackled softly in the dead of night, a whisper of static as if someone was calling across empty highways and cold rooms. "Hello." The midnight host's voice echoed through the airwaves, his words steady but tinged with unease. "This is Bob from Topeka," the caller said gruffly, his breath catching like the icy bite of winter morning. "I'm calling late, I know, but something's been not right at my old house." The host paused, a sense of dread settling in his chest like a thick blanket. "Go on, Bob," he replied gently, his tone calm yet tense. Bob cleared his throat, the sound echoing into the dark. "You've been talking about it all night. About that stranger who calls himself in." A chill ran down the host's spine, an echo of the caller's unease. "What do you mean, Bob?" "It's not just a story," Bob said harshly, his voice breaking the silence like ice. "It's something I've felt my whole life, but tonight, it's more than ever." The host pressed on, trying to stay engaged. "Can you describe this stranger? Has he shown up at your house before?" Bob hesitated for a moment, as if gathering strength. "He always comes in the night. Slams doors, whispers through the walls. He's never there when I go looking." Dread pooled in the host's stomach. "Have you tried leaving the lights on or something to make him feel unwelcome?" Bob let out a harsh laugh that carried over the airwaves. "Not working tonight. And listen." The host listened, his fingers curling around the microphone as he waited for Bob to continue. "Who is this stranger?" Bob whispered. "He's been calling himself in all night. I can hear him, even when no one else is on the line." The host swallowed hard, his mind racing with possibilities. "Tell me more, Bob." Bob hesitated again before speaking. "I'm getting cold, and there's a smell. A bad smell. Like something decomposing." The host's heart pounded in his chest as he clung to the radio mic. "Where are you now?" "In my bedroom," Bob said, his voice barely audible over the static. "The door is locked but I can hear him, knocking on it. Can you tell me if anyone else knows about this?" The host asked, feeling a cold sweat break out. Bob's words were cut off by a sharp knock at the microphone. "Are you still there? I'm calling myself in." The host's eyes widened as he heard Bob's voice echo back to him. This time it was his own voice speaking through the airwaves. "Bob?" The host whispered, his grip tightening on the mic. Then silence. Complete and utter silence. The host hesitated, feeling the weight of the unknown. Is anyone there? No answer. Just static, a whispering void that seemed to echo the empty house on the other end. Good night, Bob said through the radio, his voice fading into nothingness. I'm calling myself in, goodbye. The host stared at the microphone, a shiver running down his spine as he listened to the radio bleed back into static. The stranger who called himself in was still there, and no one would be able to explain what happened next. Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse. At 3:24 a.m., the radio in my cabin jittered as I twisted the dial. It was the middle of a cold January night, and I should have been miles away from the nearest highway, but there wasn't a single road that could whisk me to safety if I needed it. My name is Jake, and I worked the graveyard shift at the old coal mine outside Green Bank, West Virginia. The signal was weak, as usual this time of night, and the ghost stories on the radio blurred into an echo of my own fear. I was alone in a small cabin with a desk set up for a night shift that lasted until sunrise. The wooden walls creaked faintly against the steady hum of the equipment. It was then that the phone rang. The static hissed and crackled, and for a moment, it felt like someone else's voice had taken control of the line. Hello. Hello. I mumbled into my headset, my heart pounding in rhythm with the low hum of the machinery around me. There wasn't an answer, just more static. And then, as suddenly as it began, the phone went dead again. I tried to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck but couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The monitors flickered and dimmed in front of me, and I rubbed my eyes with a hand encased in its thick rubber glove. Maybe I had been staring too long. I checked my watch again, 3:27 a.m. The static on the radio intensified as if it were drawing closer. I leaned forward, adjusting the dials until one station cut through the noise like a beam of light. It was a story, someone's voice from the past, retold in present time. The host said something about old houses and restless spirits, but his words melded into nothingness as the static began to split. A figure appeared before me on one of the monitors. It was dark, a hazy silhouette that seemed to stretch across multiple screens at once. Its presence was almost peaceful. Too calm for a haunting, I supposed. As if it were a mirage, the figure moved slowly, its form shimmering in and out of visibility. The static continued to grow louder, until everything went black on one monitor. For just an instant, there was nothing but white noise, and then the figure reappeared, this time closer. The monitors flickered again, and I could see a single eye staring back at me, wide and unblinking, before it too went dark. The phone rang again, a high-pitched squeal that cut through the static. I reached for it but hesitated when I saw the monitor display, no signal. My fingers trembled as I pressed on, my heart racing. The host's voice sounded over the radio, but his words were incoherent now, lost to the chaos. And then the monitors went completely dark, just like that. No static, nothing. And the phone was silent. I sat there for a long moment, breath caught in my throat. The silence stretched on until the monitors flickered back to life, but this time they all showed only static. The figure had split the signal. I couldn't move, couldn't think of anything except that eyes staring me down from the darkness. As if reading my thoughts, the monitors suddenly went black again. And stayed that way. 3 a.m. on a quiet street in Millbrook, Indiana. The night was young, but the town had long ago settled into its slumber, leaving only the faint hum of distant traffic and the steady, eerie static of the midnight frequency drifting through the empty air. The host's voice cut through the noise, calm yet heavy with weight. Hello, this is Midnight Frequency. If you've got a story to tell about the unexplained. A sudden crackle sliced through the air, and a quiet, tired voice came over the line. Yes. It's you guys on the midnight frequency. Caller 1845, the host began, his tone unwavering despite the tension building in his chest. You just called our late-night paranormal hotline. We're here to listen. The static faded slightly as if someone was pulling their phone away from a speaker. I heard you guys had the last call before dawn, the voice said hesitantly, almost trailing off into the night. Thought it'd be nice, to say goodbye. The host paused, allowing the caller's words to hang in the air like cold mist. Can we help with anything tonight? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The host could picture the man sitting there, staring into the dark, his fingers playing absently with the receiver. Okay, he finally said, his voice more resolute. I'll tell my story. And that's where we'll close the lines for tonight. If you made it this far, if you're still here in the dark with me, then you're one of us now. The ones who listen after midnight. The ones who don't quite turn the radio all the way off. Before you go, do one thing. Subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week we bring another lost night back from the static, and you don't want to miss the frequency when it opens again. Until then, keep a light on. Check the locks. And if your phone rings after 3, and there's only static on the other end, you don't have to answer. This has been the Midnight Frequency. Good night. And sleep with the radio on.